The 8th of March, 2014. Night cloaks the runway in Kuala Lumpur. A Boeing 777, sleek, silver, and certain, begins to roll. Inside, 239 lives. Businessmen, tourists, children asleep in their mother's arms. A red-eye to Beijing. Routine. Expected. Forgettable. At 12:41 a.m. it lifts off. Another speck in the sky. Another flight on the radar. But 40 minutes in, it blinks out. No mayday. No distress signal. No explosion. Just gone. A commercial jet, in an age of global surveillance, simply vanishes. How does that happen? Unless someone made it happen. Over the next hours, days, and years, theories would explode. Search zones would shift. Officials would contradict. Families would grieve and be ignored. The world watched, then forgot. But what if the truth was never lost? Only buried? This is Echoes of Darkness, and what you're about to hear is not the official story. It's the one they didn't want you to find. – 1:19 a.m. Air traffic control hears the final transmission from the cockpit. Good night, Malaysian. 370. It sounds calm, routine, reassuring. But that was the last time MH370 was ever heard. Minutes later, the plane's transponder, the digital beacon that identifies the aircraft to radar systems, suddenly goes dark. No signal, no code, nothing. This wasn't a technical failure. It was turned off, manually. Someone in the cockpit had to reach over and flip the switch. Military radar still picks up the plane just once more, but this time, it's no longer heading northeast toward Beijing. It's turning sharply westward, crossing back over the Malay Peninsula. That's not a drift, not a meander. That's a controlled turn. And it's not the only one. The aircraft makes a series of deliberate turns, like someone navigating familiar airspace in the dark. It flies over Penang, the hometown of Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah. Some think it was a farewell, a final look at the place he once called home. Then, the jet heads into the Strait of Malacca, still flying, still silent. No mayday, no squawk code, no communication from the co-pilot, no second voice at all. Only one chilling fact remains. The man flying MH370 knew what he was doing, and he didn't want to be followed. The flight path defies logic. Instead of heading north into Vietnamese airspace, MH370 veers west, then southwest, then north again, zigzagging across commercial corridors like a ghost in the sky. Over the next hour, it crosses Penang Island, then follows a strange arc over the Strait of Malacca. Civilian radar has no trace, but Malaysian military radar does. And they never said a word until days later. Why? By the time authorities confirm the plane's strange detour, it's long gone, vanished into the night. So what happened inside that cockpit? Some theories say a sudden decompression. The crew passed out. The plane flew on autopilot. But that doesn't explain the calculated turn, the multiple altitude shifts, and the fact that someone reprogrammed the flight computer. Hijacking? Possible. But no group ever claimed responsibility. No motive. No demands. All eyes turned to Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, a veteran pilot, 53 years old. over 18,000 flight hours. A man who flew with precision. But beneath that polished record, something was unraveling. Zahari was reportedly isolated. His marriage was strained. He lived alone. And according to leaked documents, he had recently messaged political activists, some say radicals, online. Investigators later uncovered something chilling in his home flight simulator, a practice route, eerily similar to the one MH370 actually took that night. Same turns, same arc, same disappearance point. Coincidence? Or blueprint? Was this a suicide? A statement? Or something else? One thing is clear. The man who was supposed to land in Beijing never intended to get there. While the world scrambled for answers, the plane kept flying. Unknown to the public at the time, a British company named Inmarsat was quietly tracking faint signals, not through radar, but through something called satellite handshakes. These weren't voice messages. They weren't GPS locations. They were digital pings, automatic signals sent between the aircraft and a geostationary satellite overhead. Every hour, like clockwork, MH370 was still talking, but only in binary code. 2:25 a.m., 3:41, 4:41, 5:41, 7 total pings. The final one, at 8:19 a.m., occurred somewhere over the southern Indian Ocean. Then, silence. This digital breadcrumb trail was used to draw an arc, later known as the Seventh Arc, a curved line stretching thousands of kilometers, based only on signal strength and satellite position. No confirmed radar, no black box, no fuselage, just math. Search teams launched the most expensive oceanic hunt in aviation history. Over $150 million, 26 countries, years of scanning uncharted seafloor. And what did they find? A few scattered pieces of debris, a wing flap in Reunion Island, some panels in Mozambique and Madagascar, but none of it conclusive. Critics began to question the math. The margin of error was massive, hundreds of miles wide. Was this really where the plane went down? Or was it a digital illusion meant to mislead? If someone wanted MH370 to disappear, they couldn't just turn off radar. They had to confuse the very tools used to find it. Inmarsat's data was accepted without transparency. No peer review. No raw logs released. Just trust. But what if that trust was misplaced? What if the Seventh Arc wasn't a discovery, but a decoy? After weeks of confusion, the ocean became the stage. Search vessels from Australia, China, Malaysia, even commercial satellites, were deployed to scour the Seventh Arc. What followed was the most extensive deep-sea hunt in history. Over 120,000 square kilometers, dozens of autonomous underwater vehicles, millions of sonar pulses bouncing off mountains no human had ever seen. And yet, nothing. No fuselage, no cockpit, no seats, no passengers, just empty blue. Then came the finds. 2015. A piece of wing called a flaperon washes up on Reunion Island, thousands of kilometers from the official search zone. A year later, some panel fragments in Mozambique, a suitcase in Madagascar. Each item weathered, unidentifiable, drifting for months, maybe years. Investigators claimed these pieces prove the plane had crashed in the southern Indian Ocean. But if the debris is genuine, why was nothing found on the seafloor? A Boeing 777 is the size of a skyscraper. It doesn't vanish into silt, especially not without leaving bodies, seats, electronics. Statistically, it's near impossible to search that vast an area and miss everything, unless you were looking in the wrong place. Some experts quietly voiced concerns that the search area was based on flawed math, that ocean drift models were manipulated, that the found debris could have been planted. Sounds conspiratorial? Maybe. But when the only evidence surfaces years later in politically convenient locations, skepticism is not just valid, it's necessary. Because what if the Seventh Ark was not a destination, but a story, a narrative, designed to focus public attention away from the real trail? Like a magician's sleight of hand, we looked right where they wanted us to. And in doing so, we missed everything else. Among the 239 souls on board were 4 men the world barely noticed. They weren't celebrities. They weren't politicians. They were engineers, working for a company called Freescale Semiconductor. Freescale wasn't a household name, but it should have been. They specialized in microchips used for defense, radar jamming, cloaking systems, technologies at the core of modern warfare. These 4 engineers were part of a team developing next-generation military tech. And according to U.S. patent filings, they were listed as co-holders of a cutting-edge design. Then, just days after Flight MH370 vanished, the patent ownership was reassigned. The new sole owner? Freescale Semiconductor. And Freescale at the time was largely controlled by the Carlyle Group, a powerful investment firm with deep ties to the Pentagon. A firm whose past board included former President George H.W. Bush. Coincidence? Maybe. But then why? No headlines? No follow-up from the media. No lawsuits from the families. No investigations into who benefited. The names of the engineers faded into the missing passenger list. Their work disappeared into silence. It's not that someone killed them for a patent. That's too simple. But when a plane vanishes, and 4 of its passengers hold a potentially billion-dollar key to classified technology, you'd think someone would ask questions. Yet no one did. Their files are gone. Their social media wiped. Their personal histories fragments only recovered by amateur sleuths digging in forgotten forums. Almost like someone wanted them forgotten. Not just victims, but liabilities. People whose continued existence posed a threat to someone, somewhere. And when the plane disappeared, so did they. No eulogies, no legacies, no justice, just silence. Like the story of the plane itself, they slipped beneath the surface, and the world never looked back. On the outside, Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah was normal, respected, experienced. Flawless record, a man trusted with thousands of lives. But behind the cockpit door, something darker brewed. Investigators searched his home. Among the personal items, they found something chilling: a flight simulator. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual were the saved flight paths. Routes simulating landings on remote runways across the Indian Ocean, including one near Diego Garcia, a U.S. military base known for black ops and covert operations. Why would a commercial pilot Days before vanishing, practice routes into isolated islands far from civilian airspace? Malaysian officials dismissed it, said it was harmless. Curiosity, just a man playing. But experienced pilots don't play with approaches into military no-fly zones. And then came a leak, not from a journalist, not from an official source, but from an obscure Chinese military forum. It claimed Zahari had exchanged encrypted messages with a retired Chinese defense strategist, a man known for advocating psychological warfare and covert disruption. The forum post disappeared within hours, archived by only a few digital watchdogs. Was it a hoax? A plant? Or something far more dangerous? The leak mentioned Zahari's growing disillusionment, his dissatisfaction with regional politics, and a desire to make a statement the world would never forget. Again, no follow-up, no confirmation, just silence. But one fact remains. He practiced landings into places no plane should land. And that is not something you do for fun. Was Zahari staging a hijacking not for terrorism, but for disappearance? Not to crash, but to vanish deliberately. And if so, who helped? Because pulling off the world's greatest vanishing act doesn't happen in a vacuum. It takes knowledge, resources, timing, and a plan. And Zahari may not have been alone. In the middle of the Indian Ocean lies a dot, a speck of land invisible on most maps. But that dot, Diego Garcia, is one of the most heavily guarded U.S. military installations on Earth. It's not a vacation spot. It's a launch pad for drones, for surveillance missions, for operations no one ever admits. And it just happens to sit within flying range of a Boeing 777 with the same fuel load carried by MH370. For years, whispers have swirled. Islanders on nearby atolls claimed they saw something that night. A large aircraft, flying low, no lights, no sound, headed west toward Diego Garcia. The claims were dismissed. Locals misidentified a plane, saw a reflection, heard waves. But satellite paths suggest MH370's final arc could have intersected with Diego Garcia's no-fly zone. If so, why didn't any radar see it? The answer may be that it did. But that radar is classified. The U.S. Department of Defense has never officially commented. No confirmation, no denial, only silence. Malaysia said they received no assistance from the U.S. base. Australia echoed the same. But there's one catch. All search operations were eventually redirected south toward a zone defined after meetings between Australian and U.S. intelligence teams. Some claim MH370 never crashed, that it was intercepted, diverted, landed. But if that's true, why? Who gave the order? What was on board that warranted such a bold move? Military-grade electronics? Sensitive personnel? A target of interest? Or was it Zahari, attempting to seek asylum or deliver a message? And if the plane did land, what happened to the passengers? 239 lives, gone, no trace. No ransom, no footage, no leaks. Not one photo, not one whistleblower. Not one rogue agent with a guilty conscience. Nothing. Which leads to the most unsettling theory. Not only did someone know, they erased every trail. All of it. Diego Garcia remains sealed. No media access. No satellite footage released. No questions allowed. The perfect vault for the perfect disappearance. What's harder than finding a lost plane in the ocean? Finding the truth when no one wants it found. From the very beginning, MH370's investigation was plagued by contradictions, delays, withheld data, and a growing silence louder than any black box ping. Let's start with the radar logs. Thailand, Indonesia, India all had radar coverage in the region that night. Yet, none released full logs. Some said their systems weren't turned on. Others claimed they saw nothing unusual, which is strange, because military radar is designed to catch what commercial radars miss. And then there's the black box, or more specifically, its pings. Authorities reported faint signals from the seabed weeks after the disappearance, but the exact location shrouded in confusion. Search vessels claimed they lost the signal. Divers came up empty. But here's the kicker. Several independent analysts believe the black box batteries would have died long before those pings were detected. So what exactly did they hear? Or were they simply hearing what they wanted? Now let's talk about the passengers. Within days of the disappearance, families reported something bizarre. Phones ringing, but no one answered. GPS traces that flickered briefly. Emails marked read. Social media profiles going dark in unison. Coincidence? Or did someone access those accounts? One passenger, a Chinese national, had a work laptop that auto-synced to a cloud server. 3 days after the plane vanished, that laptop uploaded encrypted traffic from an unknown IP in the Indian Ocean region. Authorities never followed up. And then there's the silence from whistleblowers. Not one leak, not one disgruntled insider, not one technician who broke protocol. In a case involving multiple countries, intelligence agencies, airlines, and governments, not a single person talked. Impossible? Unless they were told not to, or never knew the full story to begin with. And the families? Their questions were met with blank stares, conferences canceled, footage redacted. Even independent journalists found doors shut, or worse, they received threats. What kind of accident requires silencing everyone? What kind of crash erases data logs? And what kind of truth does the world fear this much? If you still think MH370 was just a routine tragedy, you haven't been listening. If a plane crashes, the world watches. If a plane vanishes, the world whispers. From the moment MH370 disappeared, one thing became clear. We weren't getting answers. We were getting theater. Malaysia changed its narrative every week. First, it was a systems failure. Then, a hijack. Then, pilot error. Then, we're not sure. China, which lost 153 citizens, was uncharacteristically subdued. No diplomatic outrage. No demand for an international tribunal. Just carefully curated grief. Australia took the lead in the search, then abruptly shifted the zone by thousands of miles. based on new modeling. And what about the US? They had access to satellite data, military radars, intelligence assets. But all we got was a nod and silence. In one of the most connected eras in human history, this became the most disconnected investigation imaginable. It wasn't just about missing wreckage. It was about missing responsibility. The families of the victims, they fought, they marched, they begged. In Beijing, they were shoved. In Kuala Lumpur, they were ignored. Some parents started their own investigations, hiring independent experts, crowdsourcing satellite scans, scraping marine traffic records. What they found was often more compelling than the official narrative. And yet, the mainstream media moved on. Weeks turned into months, months into years. A few documentaries, a few YouTube theories, but no new answers. Eventually, even hope was redacted. Why? Because mystery is inconvenient. It breeds scrutiny. It costs money. It questions authority. And this mystery? It pointed fingers at governments, militaries, intelligence agencies. So instead of chasing truth, the world chose a quieter path. Forget the 239 souls. Forget the unanswered calls. Forget the radar trails and pings and final good night. Move on. Let go. Don't dig too deep. Because the deeper you go, the more likely you'll find something you're not supposed to see. This wasn't just a vanishing. This was a muting. A deliberate fade into collective amnesia. But here's the thing about silence. It doesn't mean absence. It often means suppression. And the longer it lasts, the more it says. We didn't get answers about MH370 because maybe someone already had them. What if MH370 wasn't just a plane with passengers? What if it carried something or someone more valuable? It's easy to dismiss conspiracy theories. They're often wild, unproven, sensational. But some theories are simply inconvenient truths. Let's rewind. Among the passengers were not only engineers from Freescale Semiconductor, but also individuals tied to sensitive industries, defense contracting, satellite tech, energy. Could someone on that plane have had access to critical information? A whistleblower? A carrier of encrypted data? Let's suppose someone powerful needed that information, or needed it buried. Hijacking a plane isn't easy, but controlling one remotely? That's different. Back in 2006, Boeing filed a patent titled Remote Aircraft Control System. It was designed as a safeguard, a way for ground operators to take over a plane in case of hijack, override the cockpit, lock the pilots out, land the plane safely by remote signal. Or, what if someone hijacked the hijack? What if that system wasn't used to save lives, but to erase them? It sounds dramatic, but remember, the plane made precise turns, flew for 7 hours, avoided radar, followed no commercial corridor. That doesn't sound like chaos. It sounds like control. Could the pilots have done it? Sure. Could a hijacker? Possibly. But a machine doesn't hesitate, doesn't panic, doesn't forget to turn off the transponder. And if that system existed, it would have been installed secretly, quietly, tested in simulations, never spoken of publicly. Only a handful of people would know it existed. Fewer would know how to activate it. Fewer still would have the motive. Now imagine this. The override is engaged. The cockpit locks. The pilots realize they've lost control. The plane diverts, avoids populated zones, heads toward open water. No mayday, because the radios are disabled. No communication, because the signal is hijacked. Just a digital ghost, flying on instructions from someone on the ground. The pings we tracked? Just echoes, like sonar from a submarine, not revealing the pilot, just the presence. And when the final ping ended, so did the flight. But was there a crash? Or a landing on an island no one can reach? A black site, a floating platform, a shadow facility hidden in plain sight. The kind of place where people and stories disappear. No debris, no black box, no trace, and no reason to ask questions. Because if you did, you might not like the answer. What if that technology was used, but not to save, to disappear? And if that's true, how many other planes, people, truths could vanish the same way? Not by accident, not by failure, but by design. There's one more mystery aboard, MH370, one that few ever talk about. The cargo. Flight manifests are usually public, but in this case, the list was incomplete. The original cargo manifest wasn't released until weeks later, and even then, it was redacted. Among the declared items were 200 kilograms of lithium-ion batteries, a fire hazard known to cause explosions when damaged. But that wasn't all. There was an additional 2.5 tons of cargo, labeled only as electronic equipment and accessories. No brand, no serial numbers, no declared value. And here's the kicker. This cargo was not scanned through standard airport X-ray procedures. Malaysia Airlines later admitted it was loaded under special instructions and without standard screening. That's not standard practice. It's a security breach. Why would such a large shipment be loaded in secret? Who ordered it? Who needed it off the books? Speculation spread. Was it military tech? Sensitive hardware? Or something even darker? Some say it was Chinese defense cargo. Others suggest American surveillance components en route for rerouting. Whatever it was, it never made it to Beijing. And no government ever asked why. Even the official investigation gave this part of the manifest only one paragraph. In a report over 400 pages long, the mystery cargo gets barely a mention. Why? Unless the cargo wasn't meant to be found. Unless the plane wasn't lost because of who was on board, but because of what was on board. It's been over a decade, and the ocean still refuses to give up its dead. Search teams disbanded, governments moved on, news cycles forgot. But not the families, not the ones who wake each morning wondering, was it a crash? A hijack? A cover-up? Or something even darker? Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 is no longer just an aviation mystery. It's a symbol of what we're not told, of how power erases the inconvenient, Some believe it was pilot suicide. Some, a mechanical failure. Others, a hijack gone wrong. And still others believe the plane landed, that it was silenced, that someone didn't want it or those on board to be found. Too many pieces fit, too perfectly, too much silence, from too many corners. And while the world accepted the mystery, not everyone believed it. Because if a Boeing 777 can vanish with 239 lives and leave behind no wreckage, no answers, no voices, then what else is out there, flying, unseen? What else is controlled remotely? What else can be overridden? The systems we trust may not be ours to command. And the sky above us may not be as free as we think. So we ask again, what do you believe happened to MH370? Comment, debate, share your theory, tag us, because silence is the enemy of truth. And in this story, truth never died. It was erased.